So as we began this morning, I asked you to think about a time when you fit in and a time when you felt like you belonged. And with that in mind, has there ever been a time when you felt out of place? Have you ever walked into a room and just felt uncomfortable? Or maybe you can remember or imagine being back in the school cafeteria and holding that tray and looking around, and you have no idea at which table to sit. You see somebody wave at you and you think, oh, they're inviting you over to sit, and when you walk up to them, they're like, no, not you, the person behind you. That must have been just me. Or maybe you've had the experience of you've walked into a party and it just seems that everybody who's gathered already knows everybody else. And there's nothing easy or comfortable about feeling like you don't belong in a particular situation. And it's hard enough to walk into a room of strangers and feel out of place, yet it's even more painful to walk into a room of people you already know and feel out of place. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to feel like that square peg on a round pegboard. It's difficult to feel isolated by invisible circumstances, depression, or illness. It's difficult to feel as if you just don't fit in. Or have you ever traveled far from home and felt lonely? Maybe it's your first night at summer camp, or maybe you're on a business trip and you're staying in some anonymous hotel. Have you ever just been far away from home and you've just felt to yourself, all I want to do is go home? Or maybe you felt that way without ever going anywhere. Maybe you've yearned to return to childhood where everything seemed safe and someone else took care of you. Or you've wished for a time when you could return to that moment when your parents or grandparents were still alive. Or have you wanted to return to a moment that just felt easier? To a time before you experienced any hardship or pain or sorrow? Maybe, just maybe, you've sat in your own home and you felt distant from your surroundings and disconnected from your family. You felt lonely even in the midst of a crowd. Well, don't worry, because I think it's safe to say that every single one of us have felt this way at one time or another. We've always wanted to belong to something. We've wanted to fit in, but there's just those days when we don't seem to. Well, I was introduced a couple of years ago to a speaker and author and professor by the name of Dr. Brené Brown, and she has spent years studying courage and shame and vulnerability and belonging. She's a sociology professor. And she says that those years of research have revealed to her that humans are biologically and cognitively, physically and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. But belonging is not as easy as it sounds. Belonging is not the same as simply showing up or signing up or transferring membership or renewing a subscription or crossing the aisle. Brown says belonging is an innate human desire that we have to be a part of something that's bigger than we are. But because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by just fitting in. And fitting in and belonging are two different things. Fitting in is just a hollow substitute for belonging and actually erodes true belonging. So here's how she distinguishes the two. If I get to be me, I belong. If I have to be like you, I fit in. And she goes on to say that also belonging is being somewhere where you want to be and those who are there want you to be there. On the other hand, fitting in is being somewhere where you want to be and the people who are there really don't have an opinion one way or the other. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted by being like everyone else. We do this all the time. We want to belong, but so often we just settle for fitting in. It happens at work, at school. It happens in the life of churches. As I said, our mission, our purpose here at Wesley Freedom is to make disciples of Jesus Christ who share the story of God's grace, disciples who belong, become, and serve like Jesus. And as disciples, we should want people to have this sense that they belong and not just that they fit in. However, we often tend to do the opposite. We want people to fit in. We want people to look like us or to act like us or to do the things the way we want them to do it. And often people want to be here and we give off the vibe that it doesn't really matter one way or another. But to help people do more than fit in, we really should be helping them to feel that sense of belonging. We should be going out of our way to help people make connections with us, but ultimately make connections with God, because belonging is all about relationships. And God's ultimate desire is for us to be in a relationship with Him. So Thursday, I went to, got to grab something up here. I went to what could best be described as a dress rehearsal for a seminar that we are going to be offering in a couple of weeks as an introduction to the Bible. And so the presenter of this seminar began the evening by asking the question, what is the Bible? And so what did we learn? What is the Bible? Oh, come on, people. Welcome back. Believe it or not, I've missed you. I mean, just as many answers as Sherry wrote down were answers people gave that evening. So I've been thinking about that question. I didn't give an answer. But my answer, at least one of my answers, is that the Bible is a collection of books that are all about relationships. It's that simple. These are 66 different books with 1,189 chapters, 31,173 verses that can all be read on their own and independently, but have this thread running through them of relationships. God's desire to be in relationship with humanity. From the very beginning, if you open to the very first page of the book, when God created the world and the universe, God looked upon it and wanted to be in relationship, so God created the beings and animals of the earth. And that wasn't enough. So God created humankind and breathed into us the breath of life. And from the very moment of God's desire to be in relationship with us was our desire to do our own thing. But God didn't give up on us. And we hear stories about people like Abraham, who God called he and his wife Sarah to be the founders of a great people that God could be in relationship, and they did, and then they did their own thing. So God didn't give up, and God sent Moses to gather the people together again, and they did their own thing, but God didn't give up. And then there's stories like the book of Ruth, where God went out of God's way to begin relationships with people outside of the nation of Israel. And then when all else failed and the people had just done their own thing, God sent Jesus, because God never gave up on us. And as Sherry said, I think it's that foundational verse, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. that whoever would believe in him would not perish but may have eternal life. And I think we have to add verse 17 onto that. Indeed, God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. God went to that extreme length to be in relationship with us, that he sent Jesus. Jesus, who not only died and was raised for us, but Jesus, who spent his life demonstrating what it looks like to be in relationship with God. If you want to know how to be in relationship with God, look and do what Jesus did. It's that simple, and yet that difficult. So as I was thinking, getting ready for today, one of my favorite things to do, one of the favorite things I get to do as a pastor is interact with people, but particularly I love interacting with people who have been away from church for an extended period of time, whether it was they stopped coming to church after confirmation or they were never raised in the church, but somehow, some reason they read on Eldersburg or Sykesville online that they should come here. Thank you all for the plugs. And they do, and they get just excited, and they come up to me or someone else, and they just say, all right, what do I do next? They've signed up for everything on the tear-off. What do I do next? What do I do now? And I love to tell them, just come back. What? Yeah, just come back. That simple. And keep coming back until it's time to take the next step. And I just say that because that's what God has asked of us. Come back. Come back to him. Come back to the relationship. Come back and belong to the family of God. Because we're not called to just fit in like everyone else. We are called to belong. We're called to be accepted by God for ourselves, particularly the best version of ourselves that God has created. And if you want to become the best version of yourself that God has created, then I want you to pay particular attention to this passage that Paul wrote in a letter to a church that was in Rome. Paul was one of the followers of Jesus, and in chapter 12, verse 2, Paul writes this: don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit in without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. If you want to become the best version of the person God has created you to be, focus on God as Jesus focused on God, and God will change you from the inside out. The Hebrew people had a wonderful word for this that I learned this past summer. It's a word called teshuvah. Now, we as Christians have translated this word teshuvah to mean repentance, but that's not actually what the original word meant. A better translation of the word teshuvah is return. And it's used throughout the Old Testament when God was talking to the people to return back to God, return back to the land God set aside for them, to return back to the temple again and again and again, to return to the land of your soul, teshuvah. God is inviting us to return, to set aside our usual occupations and expectations, to set aside that script we write in our mind of what we think other people expect us to be like. God is inviting us to return to a place where God just accepts us for who we are, but loves us enough to change us from the inside out. And I don't mean that God's inviting us just to belong to this particular congregation or to sign up or to give some money or to have our name on a roster. I mean belonging in a deep and unshakable way to the one whom we all belong. To come home to the one who is always with us even when we feel we're alone. To come home to the one who is waiting with infinite patience for us to stop blundering in the wrong directions of unkindness or gluttony or hardness of heart or insincerity or abuse of power. God's inviting us to come home. Come home. That's why today is one of my favorite Sundays. And not just because the Ravens kick off their season today. That's the second reason it's my favorite Sunday. But today's one of my favorite Sundays because we have kind of said goodbye to summer. And we're beginning to get back to our normal crazy schedules and our normal routines, whatever normal means. And today and this month is a season when people return home to Wesley Freedom. Today and every day is a good day to come home. It's a good day to know that there is a place where you belong. It's good to know that you have a home where you are always welcomed. It is good to know that there is an embrace that is always open to you. This is true no matter how out of place you feel, no matter how much you've been hurt, no matter what you've done, or no matter how you've hurt others. This is a place where your longing to belong can be most completely and wholly filled. We live in a time where true belonging is becoming rarer, but more important than anything else. We live in a time where true belonging requires some special courage to experience it. But if our call and our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ who share the story of God's grace, who share the story of God's love, who share that God so loved the world that He gave Jesus, then a big part of that is for us to reflect the love God has for us to other people. If this is our call and our mission, then we should be living as examples of what it means to truly belong.